This episode is brought to you by Datadog, a cloud-scale monitoring platform built by engineers for engineers. Datadog unifies metrics, logs, traces, and APM features in a single intuitive interface, allowing your engineers to quickly troubleshoot issues and collaborate across departments and time zones. Plus, machine learning-based alerts auto-detect application performance anomalies and forecast future performance. To begin monitoring your environment, start a free trial of Datadog by visiting bit.ly.com/DatadogShirt and receive a complimentary t-shirt. That's bit.ly.com/DatadogShirt. Hi, this is Scott Hanselman. This is another episode of Hansel Minutes, and today I'm talking with Dr. Ayanna Howard. I spoke to you in episode 467, and we're getting towards 700 now.
That was like forever ago.
It was forever ago. It was 2015, so 4 years ago, and we talked a little bit about some of the work you'd done at NASA and JPL and the Mars rovers, and I think you were just getting started with Zyrobotics at the time. Is that correct?
Yeah, so let's see, 2015, the company had been in existence for 2 years, but we had just started to release our first set of products in 2015. So that was still who's the market? Who's going to actually purchase these things? First customer kind of things. And, with first customer is also the, first customer blues, trying to figure out the service and things like that.
And if you have to pivot or...
Exactly. Do you have to pivot? Is it really addressing the need? What's the pricing? And all of those good things.
And you are the CTO at Zyrobotics. But then when I said, well, wait a second, are you still teaching? How many jobs do you have?
I actually have 3 jobs. So I'm a CTO at Zyrobotics. I'm also a professor at Georgia Tech. So I teach, I have students. And also I run a School of Interactive Computing. So I'm a chair. So I have an administrative hat as well with, I'm thinking with staff and faculty, over 50 employees. So yes.
Oh my goodness. Do you have some hours in the day that I do not have?
I don't know, because I still exercise. I still teach Zumba. I have kids that I go to
as well. Oh my goodness!
Yes.
Now you're just showing off.
Yeah, I kind of am.
That's fantastic. Yeah, and here's the thing though, you've been doing this with all due respect, for a long time. You were at NASA starting in 1993. You worked at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. This has been a pretty amazing career where you've been pivoting and doing multiple things at once.
Yeah, and I think it's because I go to things that I find exciting and interesting, and then it allows me to really be passionate about it, which means that I can do, like, even though I'm saying I have three and a half jobs, like, I don't actually feel like it because I enjoy doing it. And it's just, I make it part of my life, and it's not something that's separate. Like, oh, I got to go to work. Oh, I got to do this. It's like let's think of new ideas. What's going on? And when I get bored, I do switch.
That's a really good point. I mean, ultimately, if it was 3 jobs where it's like, oh, I got to wake up this morning and do this whole thing, right? I got to go to make robots and make kids happy and successful. That would be a hassle.
Yeah, no, it's actually enjoyable. And then you get that internal motivation too when you see, like, with kids, like, them learning and their eyes lighting up, and you're like, okay, yeah, this is like really satisfying.
Mm-hmm. Now, has everything been robots for you? Because I know that you're the chair of the multidisciplinary robotics PhD program at Georgia Tech, and a lot of things keep coming back to robots, but you do have experience in other areas.
I do, although I'm no longer chair of the PhD program.
Oh, okay.
Because that would have been like another 5 or 6 jobs. So it's been a while. So in 4 years, I was the PhD for the robotics, and then I transitioned to be the associate director for research for Robotics Institute. And then I transitioned to associate chair for faculty development, and now chair for School of Interactive Computing. But kind of the theme has been engineering, computer science. My research has been robotics. It's now strongly in the AI space, but still the embodiment with robotics, embodied AI.
Hmm. Are you trying to find the intersection of where AI begins and like, are you trying to build them bodies so that they can come and defeat us all?
No, not defeat us all, help us all, improve our quality of life.
Hmm.
So one of the things about like robotics in the past was that the AI wasn't advanced enough. I mean, AI was search, and like search and robotics, it just didn't
Hmm.
meld. But now, like the things that are going on in the AI world made sense for robotics. And so that's why, interacting with people and adapting to them and learning about their preferences, like that's part of AI. Emotion recognition, that's part of AI. And now it's part of robotics.
Interesting. So when I think about AI, I think about human computer interactions, and I've had a number of people on the show talking about suggestions in an action that a robot can take. Do robots also use AI in how they decide to move, or are their movements still procedurally written?
Well, no, so their movements themselves might be procedural algorithms, but which movement should they select is this intelligence, right? So, for
Hmm.
example, if I recognize that a child that I'm interacting with is happy, right? So, what is my corresponding response supposed to be? It's probably supposed to be happy or encouraging because they did something good, right? And
Hmm.
so that learning process becomes okay, what's the happy behavior versus a sad behavior versus a frustrated behavior. Um,
Hmm.
and so when I get at a happy, it may be like I have 5 ways to express happiness. And so I have to think about, well, what's the most optimal way to express happiness?
Ah, okay. Is there any concern about applying AI to movement? For example, I could say, have an AI decide whether or not to go over to the child, which would be the decision point, while then the movement would be procedural. Or I could say to the robot, you have these ways to move, figure it out. And the robot could, like, we see robots that have learning to walk, where we didn't actually teach the robot how to move its legs. It just trial and errored until it finally figured it out. Is there any concerns about applying AI to the physicality of a robot?
Yeah, so some of the concerns also feed into the AI space. So this aspect of safety or user safety, right? We worry about that with AI systems that are running things. We worry about that with robotic systems. Like how do you have a robot safely figure out something? And the problem is that there's now an actuation, right? So if I teach a robot, I want the robot to learn how to drive, right?
Mm-hmm.
The robot may learn how to drive on sidewalks. Like that's something we probably don't want to do. And so thinking about the rules that you have to put into the system so that it can learn freely, but it also has some bounded constraints.
I see. Interesting. Because I'm not sure if we talked about this 4 years ago, but I'm currently on an open source artificial pancreas system. So I have a DIY closed loop insulin pump and sensor system. So
Oh,
this is a system by which my blood sugar is read off of a sensor. It's interpreted. The decision is made for me, much like a self-driving car, except for diabetics. And then the actuation in this case would be the delivery of insulin through the insulin pump. And that's ongoing and happening. But there are also pretty significant constraints. Even if the system were to fly wildly out of control, I have to think about what's the worst possible thing that could happen that would affect my health in a negative way.
right. And so you think about thresholds, for example.
Yeah, that's exactly what we do.
Yeah.
All right, it's good to know that we're thinking about the right things because this is a community of DIY kind of enthusiasts that are putting systems like this together in the open source space.
Yeah. So I think that's really the thing is making sure that there's still constraints.
Hmm. And are you thinking about this more so now that you are developing technology for kids and little kids? Zyrobotics is doing a lot of work in the kindergarten, 1, 2, second grade type area.
Yeah, so 3 to 7, 3 to 8.
Hmm.
I do think about it quite often, and mainly it's also because when you're working with kids, they don't necessarily have a baseline of like what's right or
Mm-hmm.
what's wrong yet. Like as an adult, when we see an AI system, doing something wrong, we kind of get it that it's doing something that's incorrect. But because kids don't necessarily have a baseline, they may learn incorrect things. And so it is very important at that space and in that environment to ensure that there are constraints and that the robot has to be, or the AI system has to be, pretty much 100% correct. And if not, basically being able to send a signal back to the teacher or the parent or the clinician that, well, hey, this is what the best guess or this is what the norm is, but there's also some error.
One of the things that you've worked on since I saw you last was this idea of Zumo, Zumo, and you can check it out at zumolearning.com. Is this a robot? It looks like a big plush turtle. It's quite large.
Yes, it is a plush turtle, although we have had people call it a soft robot, which is quite interesting. And so we go with it. But it's actually, it's not a robot in terms of the actuation. What it is it has the sensing in it and it has the intelligence. And so what it does is it takes users' inputs, which are presses and bangs on the surface of the plush turtle, and it converts it to signals with respect to an app for control of an app. And so you can have kids learn things like sequences, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in the correct order that matches to an app. And so it'll take that and provide it as a sensor input to the different educational and therapy apps that we have.
It's fascinating to me when I look at the videos of the kids playing with Zumo, how they just seem completely nonplussed at this. Of course, I've got this robot and it's, I've got this plush turtle and it's talking to this screen. It's all wireless. There's all these things that we take for granted. I mean, the most exciting thing that I did growing up in the late 70s and the early 80s was attach a Sharpie to a turtle and draw, on a piece of butcher paper. And I thought that was the greatest thing ever. That took an entire weekend to figure out, and now we've got a wireless plush turtle robot with AI.
Yeah, I know. And I think that's what's so magical about it is that it feels natural. Like kids play with stuffed animals all the time, and they're curious. And so even when we see how a kid interacts at the very beginning with the plush turtle, they like press something and something happens on the screen. They very quickly realize that it's a controller, right? Very quickly. And it is one thing that engages them because like our apps, for example, are math apps. Now it's a game. It's not like, oh, I'm learning math. It's like, oh no, I'm playing. And, we're in the back going like, yeah, but you're learning math, but that's okay. You're learning coding, but that's okay because you're having fun doing it.
It's a stealth maneuver. You've snuck STEM into the plushie that they were already carrying around with them.
Exactly. And what's nice is that it really is about accessibility. And so with the design of Zumo, as well as the apps, it addresses children who have motor disabilities because the plush is basically a switch. And so if you just have a light touch, it will convert that. It also allows you to focus. So you can, parent can isolate it so that nothing works except for the center button. Right? So that allows a student to actually focus. Like, okay, we want you to start focusing. You have too much going on. It's hard for you to focus. Okay, this allows you to now focus.
I see. So it can be as simple or as complex. It can grow with the child because it looks like from the back, I'm guessing it's got like, up, down, left, right, and then a center button. It has a cross on its back, and that can be made as complicated or as simple. I see
Correct.
some kids that are very young just simply squeezing it, and that's enough for their game. But someone else could use it as a game controller.
Correct. So the whole gamut. And so it's adaptable based on the child's ability. Whatever their ability is, the system can be used.
How far do you want to take something like this? Do you want to go kind of all Teddy Ruxpin and have it talking and thinking and adding features?
Yeah, we would love that. So one would be it doesn't have a sound module, for example.
Sure, version 1.
Version 1. Well, so it's version 1, but there has some version 2 components. For example, there is some bidirectional communication. We just don't take advantage of it, right? Because of so the intelligence is there. We just don't have the outputs like a speaker in the system, but it can talk back and forth.
Debugging is an essential skill used to maintain a high standard of code, yet no one really teaches you how to effectively debug, so it ends up taking a lot of time. And that's where Ozcode comes in. Ozcode is a Visual Studio extension for C# developers that gives you debugging superpowers. With a powerful heads-up display, advanced search inside objects, link query debugging, side-by-side object comparisons, and more, Ozcode leads you to the root cause in half the time with low to no frustration. go to Ozcode, that's oz-code.com/magic to check out their magical features. You can download the free 14-day trial and try it out for yourself. That's oz-code.com/magic. What made you go from something as powerful as and impressive as thinking about robots on Mars and working with NASA and JPL to making a plush turtle? I mean, I think that they are both very important, but one could look at that as being a pretty dramatic move. Did you feel like you kind of like kicked butt out there in the world, and now is ready to bring that knowledge to the children?
No, so it's a strange path.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was at NASA, just thinking about how do you make future rover missions and how do you make them more intelligent.
Mm-hmm.
When I came to Georgia Tech, when I first came, I was still doing science-driven robotics. We were sending rovers, robotics to glaciers, right? Both on the glacier on top as well as under the water. So I was still doing those things. But then what happened was, after like one of the last studies with like the aquanauts and deploying underwater, I
Mm-hmm.
lost that passion, right? It was like engineering and it was like cool because people said it was cool, but it wasn't that like I wake up in the middle of the night, I'm like, oh my gosh, I figured it out. I wasn't doing that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had to figure out what I wanted to do. How do I reboot? Because when things get a little boring, you start filling those hours.
Mm-hmm.
And ever since, even with NASA days, I'd always done outreach. I'd always done education. I'd always done camps, STEM camps, robotic STEM camps. Like that had been kind of something I'd always done. And one year at Georgia Tech, I had a camp. So typical camp, I just do this. And I had a young lady who had a visual impairment and the stuff wasn't accessible. Like it was clearly not accessible. And I thought, and she was bright and inquisitive. And we basically, I had a student sit next to her and just kind of go through things. And as I sat there, I was thinking, this is a shame. Like, how is it that we as scientists are basically cutting off the world for an individual when they clearly could do it, but we've made the world inaccessible? And so I started doing that, but it was more of a hobby, right? It was like I had like undergrads working on this. It still wasn't the main research. But what happened was I started getting more involved in that and saying, well, hey, now we can bring in robotics, like hardcore robotics as well as education. Oh, and look, I can do therapy and work with clinicians. And so that just started becoming much more interesting. And so the switch that a lot of people see isn't like a drastic switch. It was that if you think about the train tracks, like I was doing both. And at some point it just crossed.
It's funny how that sneaks up on us sometimes. Then you wake up one day and you go, wow, I'm more interested in this than I was in that.
Right. It's amazing because you still do both. You just don't realize that one becomes more of a priority. It is
Mm-hmm.
fascinating.
So Zyrobotics is making a bunch of products now, not just Zumo Learning, but there's also STEM Stories and STEM Dash. You're making apps, also apps to teach kids how to code.
Yes, and I'm actually excited about that, and literacy apps as well.
Mm.
So the coding came from thinking about accessible STEM and what are the components of STEM. So of course there's the math, which was fairly straightforward. And then there was the
Mm-hmm.
coding, which was becoming more, and I see it even now, it's just becoming so much more of a mainstay. And states are starting to require it for graduation.
Mm-hmm.
And me interacting with kids, especially children with diverse learning needs, I was like, these systems have no clue. You can't just say, oh, all of our 12th graders are going to suddenly have to learn how to code. What about those individuals who don't have access? What about individuals who have special needs? And so that's how coding came. It was like, okay, I can teach a 4-year-old now how to code, whatever their abilities. And when you think about coding, it's like, how do you think through sequences and putting words together or code together to solve a problem and that concept. So we designed a full curriculum that, again, starting from actually 3 all the way to 8, we have 3 coding apps that get them more and more advanced through that. But it's fun and it's engaging. It works with Zumo. So it's pretty cool.
So rather than accepting that coding should be done like this and people should learn how to code like this, you are like you're saying a 3-year-old can learn the procedural things needed, the systems thinking required to be a coder, even at that age, even almost before they can read.
Yes. And one of the things is like kids are natural scientists and engineers. It's us as society that kind of drums it out of them. But if you ever see a child, I mean, they're curious. They're picking up things. They're breaking stuff. They're right. They're exploring their world and looking at cause and effects and things like that. And so when they're in that mode of how does the world work? Because I'm growing and I'm in it. I mean, that's
Mm-hmm.
the perfect time to say, oh, and by the way, the world also works in terms of coding. And this is how you think about putting things together and sequencing. When you want to explore how to break your mom's X, well, these are the steps to do it.
Mm. I was thinking about this in the context of what I learned, which was my, logo, we thought it was a turtle. Turns out it was actually just a triangle. Uh, I remember it very distinctly as being this amazing turtle in this high resolution screen, but it turns out it was just black and white and it was this little triangle. But the new way of thinking is something like you've got Tommy the robot. This is like a
Yes.
little, I don't know how to describe him. He's a little cube with little cube feet, and he walks around on a mat. But you have to move him with code. You have to teach him how to move.
You have to move him with code, and he has friends. So the app, he has friends that you have to help in terms of coding. And so, there's cat and dog and owl, and you got to get Tommy to go around the map and find cat. So cat's good. And then, cat and turtle, well, where's dog? Dog still wants to be a friend too. And so, yeah. And kids love things that move, right?
And
That's
these all have curriculum. So if you're a teacher or you know a teacher, this isn't just a thing that for someone who has some means to go and spend money and buy a robot for their one kid. This is meant in a classroom setting, right?
it's meant to be in a classroom setting. All the curriculum is online. It's quote unquote open source, i.e., it's like in files that you can easily download and change
Mm-hmm.
based on, if you want to make it a 1 day or if you want to make it a semester long curriculum.
Hmm. So you're doing all of this on both iOS and Android. So some of these things are apps you can download. Tommy the robot has a robot that comes with him. The Zumo learning system with the plush turtle or the soft robot. Does that include a tablet, or do you use your own tablet?
You use your own tablet.
Mm-hmm.
So back when we first started selling Zumo, we included a tablet. And
Mm-hmm.
what we found was that everyone just threw the tablet away
Oh,
because they
that's
had
sad.
like a lot of times like the school system had already got in the tablets, like the brand new, iPads.
I see. So you
Um,
had an Android tablet you were including, and now there's just no need.
there was no need because like nobody
Mm.
used it. It was like, okay, well, let's like get rid of that and lower the price. Like that makes perfect sense.
Oh, I see. That's funny that you mentioned that because I noticed that the price basically was cut in half, and I was trying to figure out what the story was there. The story was I'll use the tablet that I've already got.
Yes,
Interesting. Now, you had talked about your interest in working with kids that have different learning abilities, and that might be a mental limitation or a physical limitation. And there's also, you have an interest in accessible switches, people who have motor limitations to still be able to play with a tablet, even though they might not be able to touch the screen.
correct. Because I think when you have the abilities that we should, as scientists and engineers, we should basically ensure that we provide access to what's out there. And the world is becoming this world. I would say touch based world, right? Like
Hmm.
even the
Yeah.
ATMs that used to have key, like you have to go and you have to touch the screen.
Mm.
And so I worry that as we continue, if we don't think about this consciously, that we're going to be in trouble. Like, especially since we now know that older adults, as they age, also have limitations in fine motor control. So we need to design on both ends of the spectrum.
That's a great point. And I've noticed that your apps don't require really precise touches. You've put this not just with physical things like this button that you can add to your tablet, but also the apps themselves don't require real fine motor control because these are for kids, small people.
Correct. So no tiny buttons, no swiping across, nothing that requires you to um, physically like to make the movement also a cognitive based movement. We're not doing
Mhm.
that.
Where do you see things like this going in the future? Right now, you said that the turtle is has the potential for back and forth communication. Do you think that plushies that are smart have the potential to be as big as something like an iPad?
I think for a certain target demographic, I know for one thing, you can, if you think about even the more gaming industry, right? Like with
Hmm.
all the things that are out there, Xbox and so, um, what happens if you can convert that into an educational tool? Which it really isn't, right? It's a gaming tool. But if you can convert that to an educational tool, make your games educational, and then add in things like plushes and things that's exciting, just like, and people would just be like, oh, this is like kind of a nice controller for this game machine.
Hmm.
I think you can start really making education a priority.
Yeah, I was really impressed with the accessible Xbox controller that came
Yes.
out recently. I mean, that's got a lot of potential as well, and I wonder if that could be expanded or extended with something like your things. I mean, it has an open API. Basically, anything with a 1/8 inch headphone jack can be plugged into it. Uh, there's a whole ecosystem around buttons and things that can plug into Xbox controllers. I wonder if they could be used on something that wasn't an Xbox. I don't know.
Well, I think it's pretty close. In fact, the construction of the uh, basically accessible Xbox controller that they
Right, the
released,
adaptive controller.
yeah, which is awesome. Functionally, it's how Zumo works. So if
Hmm.
you open up Zumo,
Hmm.
there's actually all of these 3.5 millimeter jacks that go
Really?
into our controller. Yes,
Great minds think alike.
yes.
Of course, I would never open my friend up, or and certainly not within the view of one of the children.
Yeah, that would be kind of, you'd have to like, yeah, that wouldn't be kind of nice. Not in front of someone, right? It have to be in a behind closed door, no one peeking in.
Absolutely. So Zumo has apps on iTunes and Google Play, so it works with both Android and iOS. Are you making new apps all the time, or what's next for Zyrobotics?
We are. So our current set of apps are an enhancement to our STEM stories.
Hmm.
So one of the things that we had discovered, so our STEM stories combine literacy. So because again, we're working with kids who are also learning how to read, early readers,
Hmm.
and our STEM stories were putting in STEM concepts. So you can read about like Tommy the turtle, who's a
Hmm.
turtle, walks you through coding through this interactive storytelling mode. What we
Ah.
had was teachers were asking, well, can I get some feedback? Can I use it to also provide some input to the student? So we
Uh-huh.
have this whole called readable stories that's based on STEM stories that as it reads to you, you read to it, it provides you information on how to correct your reading. So it's literally a reading tutor in the home.
I see. So you're reading the story on your iPad. I can see that the you can download some of the STEM stories for free, and then on the screen you can decide what Zumo does and how he interacts. Basically, key bindings for the techies amongst us, and you adjust Zumo's key bindings and interact with him as you read the books.
But it also verbally gives you input.
The tablet talks.
The tablet talks.
Okay, so there's a narrator.
There is a narrator, an avatar. Yes.
Okay. And you said that they are Switch accessible ebooks, where that Switch might be Zumo the turtle, or it might be one of your other switches.
It could be not just our switches. So we really want to ensure, like when I think about accessibility and access,
Hmm.
it also means this community. And so any of the switches that are out there and available
Mm,
that currently work with iPad or Android will work with our apps.
that's pretty slick. And it's also worth pointing out that the app has no in-app purchases. There's no advertising. I know that we download a lot of iPad apps that are filled with ads and things that we don't necessarily want blasted into our kids' brains. There's a ton of apps that you've got. I'm looking at what is it, like 20 plus apps that Zyrobotics has in at least in the iTunes store, full of STEM stories,
Correct.
all without advertising.
With no advertising. So there's no fear of like something coming in through the back door. And it also means that So one of the things we've noticed with some of the quote unquote free apps, because they're not free, but when a kid is working with it, it actually is distracting from the educational content, right? Which is not helping their learning. Like as you're doing something, you need to be immersed in this experience. And if it's that, oh, in order to go to the next stage, there's this ad, you've just broke that connection for learning.
Right. And when you've taught the child about these idle tappers where you're teaching them how to be advertised to, which has been a big problem for my kids, 11 and 13. They are willing to tolerate this ad and they'll sit there and passively watch it beam into their brains, which is frankly got me looking for apps that don't have that kind of nonsense.
Yeah, I know.
So folks can check out Zumo, the turtle, at zumolearning.com. And STEM Stories is stories with a Z at the end. I'm going to make sure that I include links to all of this in the show notes. It's been really nice catching up with you. It's been a while, and maybe I'll check in with you in a couple of years and see how things are going.
I know. Let's not make it 4, though.
Let's not. That's absolutely true. Hopefully I'll see you sooner than later.
Yes, that would be lovely.
We've been talking with Dr. Ayanna Howard from Zyrobotics. This has been another episode of Hansel Minutes, and we'll see you again next week.